Welcome to the Data Strategy Show. My name's Samir Sharma and I'll be your host today. My guest is Michiel van Staden, who is the Data and Analytics Lead at Absa Bank. He's worked within data and analytics roles ranging from fraud prevention, credit risk and operations to digital and marketing, as well as engaging data security, privacy and regulations. He loves to drive the implementation of value-adding data science initiatives and guiding business strategy by collaborative data storytelling. His leadership development journey is purposefully driven by a keen ear for listening, refined through ongoing coaching studies, and a joy in increasingly sharing his learnings via mentoring, public speaking, and writing. I hope you enjoy this episode and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Welcome, Michiel van Staden, and thank you for joining me on the Data Strategy Show today. It's a real pleasure to have you, Michiel. And listen, first things first, I really wanted to congratulate you on winning, I believe this year in July, the DataCon Data Analytics Leader of the Year. So well done. That must have been a fantastic moment for you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the welcome, Samir. Yeah, and it was just such an honor being recognized from kind of the peers in the industry for some of the things I've been, fortunate enough to achieve.
Brilliant, brilliant. So listen, this is all around what we're going to discuss today is all around how do we build effective data and analytics teams, and I think it's an important and vital subject at the moment. Many people, I believe, in many companies are struggling to do this effectively, and I think there's a couple of components. There's the components of how diverse does the team need to be, how curious do you need to have people in your teams, what's the kind of way that the teams need to work with the business, and how do you build and set up and drive and coach those people? So if we can go across those four types of areas, but we'll do a little bit more about that. But first, if you can just give us a little bit about your journey through your career and how you've arrived at Absa and where you are right now, that would be great.
Yeah, so I suppose the bits that's kind of stuck with me from my journey, I came from the stats background, so pretty technical, keen on numbers. Went into a lot of theoretical stuff in my studies, and I'm still wondering whether I'll someday find an opportunity to use it. But yeah, going from that, I suppose generally going from being a student to full-time employment is quite a change. But yeah, I suppose there was also the aspects of coming from very technical, theoretical, thinking I know it all, into business. We now need to start practically applying these things. And there's so many new things that you now need to deal with. So that's something that really stuck with me. And then I suppose, from there, that journey of how do you take what you know and what you've learned, and how do you now practically start applying it?
Sure.
And moving from doing your own thing to then moving into leadership, and how do you know now influence more people, coach more people, guide others through this journey as well.
You know, you work for a very, very large organization, and as you said, you've worked to implement a lot of the theory that you have gained over the years. That knowledge is key. How do you start to build effective data and analytics teams within organizations?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, and I think it's something that there needs to be a lot more discussion around, because I think it's definitely also evolving.
Yeah.
Thinking back to when I started, most of the people joining kind of came from similar background, stats background, where you had a pretty good numbers background. You didn't necessarily have much of a computer science background.
Okay.
You did a little bit of computer science in your studies, maybe, if you were lucky enough. but most of that you learned on the job. So it was almost like you had to go through kind of a second year, 2 of studies. We're actually learning to program, because with the volumes of data that we're working with today, there's no ways you can practically do anything useful if you can't program. So that was so interesting. And then there's so much you need to learn about business, which if you're coming from a stats background, you also don't necessarily know. So some of the people that have come in to teams that I've seen have a really interesting and big impact have come from other areas, some from engineering, where they brought a lot of curiosity, with I suppose that inclination of solving problems. So I've seen some interesting people coming from that side. I think computer science is just becoming increasingly important, because practically you really need to build stuff inside a business. You need to build tools, you need to build infrastructure. Increasingly, you need to build self-service, so that the rest of the business can kind of help themselves and get to the data themselves. So computer science is becoming increasingly important. And then data science that has blown up recently also brings a very interesting dynamic, because now it's almost bringing in more technical skills again. Whereas previously, a lot of the data people that I worked with wasn't necessarily that technical anymore. They maybe came from stats studies, but a lot of what they did initially was almost less technical. Now with this data science and AI boom, it's almost bringing the technical back again. So there's just so many interesting waves and oscillations around it. I think it's really something that needs a lot more unpacking.
Yeah, you mentioned something there around curiosity, and I think that's an interesting word when we think about building and scaling teams across a business. How do you've just talked about the number of teams from being, sort of computer science driven numbers people to very technical data science teams. How do you start to build and bring that curiosity into those teams as a leader? What are the things that you're looking for? How do you start to design processes and get people to think in a more curious way? Because they can't just be focused on a mathematical model anymore. That's not the way that we do things. So how do you do that? How do you build that?
I think you naturally, within this field, get a lot of people that are curious, but you touch on a key thing there. A lot of those people are curious about numbers. Those that come from the computer science background are maybe curious about that aspect of it. And then you got your data science people that are very passionate about all the different technical aspects and evolving technology and things around that. But you really need to develop a curiosity for your business and your organization. That's such a critical core part of it. And what I found work really well is exposing those people to the business more and more. So getting them involved, putting them on those platforms in your exco and business review meetings, where they can initially just kind of absorb what this business is about and get to know it. And that thing kind of breeds their curiosity in that direction. But also getting them to present. And that, in a sense, kind of forces them sometimes to a bit of a difficult journey. Because they might think they've figured it all out. They've got this brilliant algorithm. In theory, they've solved all the problems. But then they really start to have to face the business realities. You might have this perfect solution in your mind or in paper, but if you can't get the rest of the business to buy into this and take them on this journey and also understand their realities and their experience and their input, you don't get any results ultimately. So it kind of forces them, in a sense, to become more curious about the business as well, and then start working on more of their softer skills and the other things around that.
So let's just quickly talk about those softer skills. You know, that's one of the things that is often overlooked. I see many job specifications for analytics people, which have a very, very technical slant to them. And there's many conversations now you'll see on LinkedIn and other forums where people are continuously saying this doesn't make sense. So what are some of those softer skills that they need? So for analytics people now thinking, or even graduates who are thinking, I want to become a data scientist, or I want to become a machine learning engineer or whatever it might be. What are those softer skills that they need in order to be more malleable when they walk into a corporate?
So first thing that comes to mind is probably those listening skills. Because you're coming in with so much knowledge and so much technical know-how into the business, but as I said, often those first couple of years you almost need to go through another degree or another couple of years of studying. It's almost like in accounting where you're doing practical portions of it. So you really need to, if it doesn't come natural, you need to develop your listening skills. And I think for a lot of people in a lot of different areas, listening isn't something that comes that naturally. So I think that's something you definitely need to develop. How do you really listen to your stakeholders around you? Because ultimately you need to understand their problems and solve their problems. It's not about coming with your perfect solution and trying to just implement it. All starts ultimately with what's your organizational problems, and how are you as a specialist going to contribute to solving that ultimately. So listening is so critical. And then communication. So there's, I suppose, more formal presenting. So how do you tell a data story? Visualization, I suppose, comes into it, but it's just a part of it. There's the bigger presenting, telling a story, influencing people as well. That's so key. And then increasingly, if you then want to move into more management leadership roles, really becomes more and more about building relationships and building your network out into the business, because that then enables people to increasingly come to you with problems because you've got that relationship, and you can also reach out more for support that you might need, because in a big organization you don't deliver anything by yourself.
Sure.
So you always need to work with other people. So I suppose those would be the three things that comes to mind now.
Brilliant. So how then, when you're building the team, what are the types of individuals that you're looking for? I'm, for example, you built a team at Absa. What were the first types of people that you brought in? So I'm just thinking about people who might be out there now, thinking, well, I need to build an analytics team. People might go out and get a dozen data scientists. Does that really work? Probably not. So what are the kinds of balance in your team that you require from the onset, and how do you start to build, and what sort of frameworks or tools do you provide at the big, when you start and building these teams? So it's just really about, how do you ramp up, and what do you look for initially?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done so many interviews over the last 4 or 5 years, and how we interview has evolved so much. If I'm thinking back 5 years ago, we did quite a technical interview where we almost had people on paper solving algorithms and things, which I think had its place, and maybe still has its place, because it tests, I suppose, that cognitive ability around solving problems. Ultimately, you're going to be working with a lot of numbers, and you need to be comfortable around them. So So I suppose there is that aspect, but more and more in interviews, it's been more about looking for, as I said, increasingly the computer science skills. So what can you actually build?
Yep.
Because you're not going to be sitting in the office solving things on paper,
Sure.
Or in Excel or whatever. You need to increasingly be able to build things that are sustainable and that can go into production, so that you can move on to the next project. We don't want you to be stuck in doing the same thing over and over. So there's definitely that. And then there's, in that interview, I found myself increasingly looking for people that can engage, that are comfortable, even though they might be a bit nervous. People get nervous in interviews, that's a reality. But you do look for people that can kind of push past that and engage with you in a conversation. If they don't understand something, tell you, I don't understand this. And ask questions from their side as well. So it's very much looking at whether these people can, from the outset in the interview, start building this relationship and start engaging around technical topics in a way that is more practical and more engaging.
Yeah. Okay. So there's one thing about teams and scaling and building those teams, but there's something about, you used the word or expression earlier, being able to tell a story. How do you build those data storytelling capabilities, or even, coupling that with data literacy? Because it's not always being a mathematical person or being a data scientist or an uber technical person that they are so natural in this area of storytelling. So how do you build those skills into those teams, and what are the things that you're going to be looking for, certainly for, in a coaching sense, and in an advisory mode when they're engaging with the business? How do you build that? Because I think those skills are still lacking across the board.
There are definitely courses that we've tried over time to send people on. So voice courses or presentation courses. And those would give you, I suppose, tips and things that you can do to hide your nerves or push through it or calm yourself down or speak more clearly or those kind of things. But where the real transformation happens and where people really start to figure it out is all around the practical.
Yeah.
So there it's been so key to really expose people to those forums. You've done this technical piece of work, go and present it to people. And there might be a whole bunch of sessions where you just don't get your message across, you get stuck. There's so many questions that you don't know where to start with answering. Nobody gets what you're putting up there. And all of these things, the learnings that you get from this is just so valuable. Because this is where you really start to, in your own mind, figure this out and make that mind shift. Because there's a really fundamental mind shift that needs to happen from, I've got this data problem in front of me that I'm solving, and I'm trying to get the best algorithm or solution for it, to there's this audience of people that I'm working with, and how do I engage with them? So it's totally a shift from what I'm doing and how amazing this solution is to who's sitting in front of me, who's working around me, and what do I need to tell this person at this stage or ask this person towards moving this project forward, towards finding a solution. Because ultimately it's all about finding collaborative solutions. And that's where the stories often comes in. It's not my story. It's often starting from somebody else's story or starting from a business problem, and then taking that and then building or weaving your story or your solution or what you're finding in the data into that, and then finding a very collaborative solution that the business can move forward towards.
And I think I like that that process, because you are there's lots of times I'll walk into businesses where I will look at things that they've built, and I will ask the question, so what's the fundamental question, the business question that you're attempting to answer here? And I often get a sort of puzzled look from the analytics person, or the data scientist, and they sort of think about it for a couple of seconds, and then they realize that they haven't really collaborated in that sense enough with the business. So it's a very important point that you make around that. How do you encourage that collaboration? What do you do at Absa to encourage the collaboration? Some people I've spoken to previously will say, we won't run a project or we won't build anything without there being at least 6 weeks worth of work, or X amount of weeks worth of work where we're embedded in the business, and we understand the processes and so on. So what do you do? How do you get them to be more collaborative in that sense, and take them along that journey so that the outcome is more effective? And I think you've without saying it, you've sort of the other word that comes into my head is probably the one that you missed off your list, but you're talking about it now, so, and it's it's come out in my head is empathy around that piece as well. So just I guess there's two questions in that. So how do you get the business collaboration tight enough, and ensure that person is really engaged, and then I think it's how do with that, then how do you know that they've really experienced that relationship, and felt what they feel?
Yeah. So a lot of our analytics teams have been federated into the product area. So
Right.
a lot of those data and analytics functions sit inside of the business now. And they sit in those business reviews, so they're very much part of the business, and exposed to the business on a very regular basis. So that's something that definitely helps with that gelling of the team. Also, getting the data specialists to feel part of the business. In the past, we've often spoken about the business as if it's outside of the data function. But the business that sits there,
Yes.
and then we, the data function or the IT function. But we've very much federated or integrated it now. Your data specialist, even your IT and tech function, now sits inside of the product area in the business. So they're very much part of it. And your discussions around what the priorities are and what the team should be focusing on and where the key challenges are is very much a discussion between all of these parties.
Yeah.
So it's not your data team sitting in a corner coming up with solutions, or your business discussing what they believe the problems are and then going to your analytics team and just asking for a solution. It's very much from the start, what's the business struggling with and how do we together unpack this? And there your data and your technical teams also need to come in with questions.
Yes.
Because the product teams doesn't necessarily always know exactly what the problem is or what needs to be solved. So there already your technical teams need to play a role in terms of helping to get to the real root business challenges. What are we really struggling with, or what's really going to take us forward? Or where do we want to go to as a business? And then how do we now work together towards tech playing its role, towards data playing its role in those discussions?
So I really like that approach, and actually it's uncovered something that you talk about in terms of a federated model. So that federated model itself is a lot of companies go through this journey. They build an analytics team. They think about a center of excellence. They have a hub and spoke model, or they go through various different ways that you might have a distributed team or whatever that might be. What were some of the challenges for you building out this team and then adopting that federated style? Now, it'd just be interesting to understand what those were and how you overcame those.
Yeah, I think what we did really well when we had a central chief data office is building a lot of your technology rails around taking the business forward. So real fundamental strategic projects around where we're going to store our data, what kind of tools we're going to use, those kind of things. But I do feel there was a definite disconnect between that and the more immediate business challenges that the product areas was currently struggling with and that they really needed help with.
Right.
So that's where kind of the impetus came for this whole federated model. And I think now that we're kind of on this federated journey still very much, it's definitely not an end state yet.
No.
I think we're seeing, as I mentioned, a lot more integrated discussions around what the more immediate challenges are. I do believe what we still grappling with is a lot of your data management and governance.
Okay.
The kind of things that are still, I suppose, very difficult for your product areas to embed and feel comfortable with managing. So I think there we're still very much on a journey around how do we empower our product areas to manage this themselves. I think it's definitely the more sustainable journey because you're now forcing your products to figure out what's your data strategy and how are you going to manage your data. And how are you going to tackle all these technologies and buzzwords flying at you.
Sure.
I think it's definitely the right journey, but it's definitely a much longer one than having the central function that has, I suppose, more of the skills in a central place, a center of excellence.
Yes.
From where they can manage it.
Yeah. And you touched on a really interesting point there around data management and governance, and you and I know that that's crucial when we want to think about, to use the term earlier, self-service. And in some ways, I still believe that self-service has led to a lot of issues that we've had in terms of data literacy and certain other aspects of adoption across businesses. From a data management and governance perspective, what are the types of things that you've done to embed perhaps into the business side, the protocols or policies? What have you done in order to affect that, but also given them the support from? And I'm sure you've still got somewhat of a small, perhaps central team that does, still sort of feed out to other areas. So how do you get the business to think about data management and data governance, which is often seen as a very boring subject? How do you get them to sort of take that and say, yes, we accept that it's our data because we generate it. It's the data that we use to populate systems, etc. How do you get them to think about that?
Yeah, I find there's a lot of education involved there. And what I've found really, really useful and powerful is specific use cases, where some of them, unfortunately, are around things going wrong, or there being fraud losses, or opportunity being missed, or some new process that we built not working as we envisaged it. So I do find those things are really powerful, because you ultimately need to find some gravitas around data governance.
Yeah.
It's generally not the most exciting topic. So you don't have people running to you asking you whether we can do this amazing data governance thing.
Yeah.
And it's, the business has so many other priorities and problems. So you really need to start linking it to those challenges that the business is experiencing.
Yeah.
You had this problem, you had these fraud losses, or you had this process that we spend so much time and resources and money on that didn't quite deliver. And this is the role that data could have played in understanding what's happening with that process better, in managing it more closely. And then the lights kind of start to go on, where it becomes an increasing priority. You've obviously got the regulatory pressure as well.
Sure.
That is something that a lot of their product heads already know they're probably going to have to do, but it's still a bit of a grudge purchase, where, oh, geez, we need to do this thing, but how can we maybe delay it a bit or get to it later?
Well, the regulators will catch up sometime.
Yeah, at some point. But yeah, if you can start linking it to more immediate challenges.
Yeah.
This is something we really wanted to deliver, or something we really bet it on, or put our bets on, and it didn't deliver. So let's unpack why it didn't work out.
Sure.
And the role that data governance could have played in that, and more importantly, what do we start doing now around similar projects being in flight, so that we actually get this right this time.
And I really like that, because I think that takes away that word, and it puts it back, the onus on the business to say, look, this is these are the most important things for you. These are the challenges that you're going to have, and if that challenge is real in terms of regulatory, and maybe there's a fine, maybe there's something that there might be, which is going to be a bit of angst for the business. That's the way it needs to be sort of delivered, perhaps, so that they understand the importance of governing, of ownership, of stewardship, and really being able to say, that is my data. That's what I must own, because I create it, or my team creates it, and it's meant for this larger thing around, obviously for a bank, but the regulator's going to come and inspect this data and expect me to start to report out on it on a regular basis. So I think those are fundamental things that a lot of people go into governance with we're just going to talk about governance. We're just going to talk about how we need to make sure that we've got strict policies and procedures, and most of the time people just glaze over. So I think that's a brilliant example of how many could fundamentally implement something like that. So we're getting to the closing point soon. So what I'd like to do is just to switch it around. We've been talking about teams. I want to talk a little bit about leadership, and to go back to the outset of when we spoke about you winning the award for leadership in terms of data analytics. So how do you or what's the advice that you have for upcoming people who are looking at leadership positions within the area of data and analytics? What would you consider are the, say, top 3 things that they should be thinking about to develop themselves and to really get to a point where they can see themselves progress and get into that position?
Well, firstly, I would say it's definitely about starting to think about other people. So the other people that are going to start reporting into you, or even before you go into leadership, as you're becoming more senior in your individual role, the people around you, in your own team, but maybe also in other teams. how can you increasingly help those people on their journey with what they're struggling with? How can you start unlocking their potential? So it's very much an initial mind shift around from the specific problems that we're facing, or from what I'm doing or what I'm good at, to the people around you. And how can you really start helping those people on their journey towards ultimately getting them to a place where they can solve the problems by themselves in their way.
Yeah.
And that maybe links nicely into my second point around letting go of a lot of your ideas around what the best way is to tackle this, or what the best solution is. You need to give other people more space so that they can really come in, and they might fail quite a bit. You might miss a few deadlines. And those are definitely things that you always need to manage. So you can't just sit back and allow your team to fail and figure it out by themselves. Here and there, you need to manage it a bit and step in, but you need to have this general willingness to give them the space to figure things out by themselves. Come with their viewpoints and their ideas and their new skills based on new technologies that you might not be as familiar with as they are. So I do believe that's definitely a key aspect that you need to think about. And then lastly, you need to be prepared to expose those people to the realities. Personally, I found, having gone through quite a difficult journey of figuring out how do I explain this technical stuff, or how do I have actual impact, and how do I engage with people, I have personally found a tendency to protect my team too much.
Sure.
Some instances where you definitely want to shield them from some stuff, but you don't want to make them totally oblivious to the realities. At some point, as early as possible, you want to start exposing them more to business pressures, to what it means to have an actual impact, to dealing directly with stakeholders. You've got this difficult stakeholder. You let me know when you get stuck, but you go talk to this person. Phone them.
Yeah.
Also, don't just keep sending them emails and then leave it. Go talk to them. You deal with this person, you figure out how to make this work. So you need to ultimately start exposing them more and more, so that they can find their own voice, find their feet. And that's what then ultimately frees you up to increasingly move into more strategic and higher leadership roles.
Yeah.
If you can have more people around you in your team that can start taking more leadership roles themselves. And it's tough because it's, I don't know, I suppose I come from the technical world, so I'm maybe a bit more biased. But you got a lot of technical stuff to deal with. You need to keep educating yourself, keep evolving. And at the same time, you need to deal with the relationships, soft skills, people around you, business reality. So it's tough. So allow people to go on that journey.
And I like that, because you've succinctly, for me, put it into those three buckets, which I like. The sort of be selfless, and you've got to remove yourself out of the equation now. And that goes on to your second point, which is really about, check your ego at the door. Don't always think that you will be the person who's going to have the loudest voice or the loudest idea, and you will always prevail. Because I think you've got to give that shift in the mindset to others to experience and to generate their own ideas, concepts, and projects. And I think we've all gone through that process of, it's not always been right. And your point to, you've got to let them fail to experience that, to really understand that journey is key. And I think no one's actually said this before, to expose them to the realities of what you've talked about, in terms of the realities, I think, of deadlines, of business problems, critical business problems, what happens in certain situations. And I think that's an interesting point, because often as analytics people, teams, those who are thinking, I need to get to the next rung, perhaps they don't see that full exposure of what a business really is exposed to, both internally and externally. What are the impacts? So I think that's really important. And 3 great points. Thank you so much for that. Fantastic. So we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Michiel. It's been fantastic to speak to you. And I wish you well on your journey, and look forward to hearing more about you in the near future.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, and really enjoyed the chat, Samir. Yeah, it's such a privilege to be able to share some of my learnings.
Pleasure to have you on.
All the best that side, and to everybody else.
Thank you.